Good afternoon to everybody. I will be making two introductions. One introduction for the ambassador and one introduction for everybody. To start off, Ambassador, I'd like to tell you about the Ankara Policy Center, first of all. The center was established in January 2012. Unfortunately, it was largely inactive during the last few years, but now it is being reinstated, revitalized by mostly retired ambassadors and diplomats, as well as some others. It is growing, and its mission is to discuss and put forward policies on a vast range of international issues. The APC is already putting forward assessments on several important matters facing Turkey, and you are the first ambassador in which we have embarked upon on this guest speaker list. Now I'd like to introduce the ambassador to our participants. Ambassador Nicholas Meyer-Landrop has been a close collaborator of Chancellor Angela Merkel. He was her deputy and then chief advisor from 2006 to 2015. In 2015, he was sent as ambassador to Paris. And since August 2020, a little over 6 months, he was appointed as the EU ambassador to Ankara. Now, Ambassador, before I give you the floor, I'd like to make a few remarks so that we can kick it off. Last week when we were together, you might remember the President announced the Human Rights Action Plan. And of course, the most important thing is its implementation. There is a softening approach in the Turkish foreign policy in the last few weeks, especially with regard to Greece, France, and there will be a meeting on the Cyprus issue next month. And most importantly, right now, there will be a European Council meeting at the end of March. So do you think all these efforts by the Turkish side will have some positive effect on our relationship? Please, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me. Thanks very much for having this opportunity to talk with you and to exchange. I'll try to make an introduction which is not too long so that we can have a bit of an exchange. And to your question, yes, I would say since the end of last year, mid of December, early of this year, we see what I would describe as a window of opportunity, where we hear both sides, the European Council, but also the authorities in this country, speaking about creating the environment for a positive agenda to take foot, to be developed. Now, of course, there are expectations on both sides. There are expectations which the European Council had expressed in its conclusions. There are expectations on the Turkish side. I will start with the European side. I think one of the key questions was de-escalation in the Eastern Mediterranean. And we can see since the beginning of this year that effectively things have developed in a positive manner. Let me give the elements. We see that research vessels have left contested waters. We see that the bilateral Greek-Turkish exploratory talks on maritime boundaries and everything around this have resumed. We also see a much more effective and intensive deconflicting taking place on the military side within NATO, which is also an important element to stabilize the environment. And as you mentioned, the UN has now, after intensive pre-consultations, invited for an informal 5+1 meeting, the UN and the 2 community leaders and the 3 guarantee countries to Geneva at the end of April. So I would say at this stage, we have reached a situation where we are not talking about diplomacy, but where we are putting in place the instruments, the fora, the negotiation strength in which diplomacy can actually take place. Of course, this does not mean that all these issues are solved immediately in the first meeting, but we are back to a situation where we have channels, appropriate channels, in which these issues can be discussed. So I think this is a considerable progress compared to the situation in last autumn. And I'm sure that the European Council, in its assessment at the end of March, will take this into account. On the other side, we have expectations which are voiced publicly in Turkey as to what, from the Turkish point of view, a positive agenda should be, which is quite far-reaching, covering many areas from accession perspective and negotiations to visa-free travel, to customs union, to resumption of high-level dialogues, to continued and strengthened cooperation in migration and refugee issues. So now I think the next 2.5 weeks will be important to see how these different expectations can be matched, what a next stage could be. But I would say today, if the European Council would take place today, we would not be in a situation as we had been in December, where people would ask, will the European Council enter into discussions on additional restrictive measures, but rather what is the perspective the European Council sees for perhaps an incremental progress in terms of widening cooperation. But this, in the end, is something where heads of states and government will have to decide collectively, which is always a complicated exercise in the European Union. And it's very difficult to project today what will be the exact outcomes. But all in all, as I tried to say in the beginning, I think there is a window of opportunity. I think there is constructive work, diplomatic work also between the European Union and Turkey going on. And I hope that that will lead to some progress also at the end of March. Perhaps I leave it as this for the beginning. And I'm well, looking forward to your questions and to your comments.
Right, thank you very much. Well, I'd like to remind our participants that we are at Chatham House rules, so that the ambassador can speak more freely. And of course, I would like to now remind our participants that if you press the participants, and then you can raise your hand by clicking the raise hand button, and then we can proceed onwards. So as I wait some questions, let me ask that, with regard to the dialogue you mentioned, the high-level dialogue that is supposed to happen. I remember that the president had invited the presidents of the council and the commission to Turkey. And as far as I recall, they were accepted. So do you think that this will happen prior to the council meeting, or do you have any inclination about any possible dates for that?
I cannot tell you any dates because up to now, no dates have been agreed. And I think at the moment when dates will be agreed, they will be public almost immediately. I would not exclude a contact at that level before the European Council. Will, under current circumstances, this contact necessarily need to be a visit, or can this also take other forms, like our conversations take other forms? I don't know. That is up to the participants to decide. From my point of view, I recommend to have an exchange even before the European Council at that level. But again, at this stage, I cannot announce any date because they are still under preparation.
Right. Thank you. The first question is coming from Ambassador Hasan Görüş.
Thank you, Ambassador. I have a very small correction to your introductory remarks, and then I will ask my question. Regarding the talks between Turkey and Greece, we call it exploratory talks. That's it. I mean, when you say exploratory talks on maritime boundaries, this is totally in line with the Greek view, saying that we discuss only continental shelf. But we have airspace question, demilitarized status of the islands. I mean, they are all combined to each other, and all those topics are included in the agenda. My question is, as Selim said, the Turkish government announced a new human rights action plan. But so far, we did not see any statement or remark from the EU side. How is it received by EU? Is it a good step but not enough? Because I also recall Minister Çavuşoğlu made a statement that should satisfy EU, especially regarding the roadmap for the visa liberalization. Does EU concur with this opinion?
Well, on the first point of exploratory talks, don't get me wrong. We don't want to set the agenda. The agenda for talks between two countries have to be set by the two countries. And it's when I mentioned that this is about boundaries, this is not for me to define an agenda. Far from me, this is up to you, and it's a bilateral issue. And you will anyhow in bilateral talks discuss what both sides want to discuss. So I think that's not our agenda. On the human rights action plan, we are at this stage, of course, looking very carefully into it, and it's an important and quite thick document. So I will not want to jump to any conclusion at this stage. But I will also want to say that, particularly in this area, there are expectations in European public opinion, political leaders, parliaments, which go in the direction of not only a plan, but also implementation. So the real assessment of what this human rights action plan will prove to be will come with its implementation. And then we will be able to see more clearly if this human rights action plan leads to changes, to a different attitude in certain areas, to decisions which are important in practical terms. So I don't think we would at this stage react on the document as such. What will be important is the implementation.
Right. Thank you, Ambassador. As I wait for other questions from our audience, let me point out that you mentioned the many components of our relationship, which is accession talks, visa liberalization, customs union, and of course, dialogue at a high level. Now, you also mentioned the positive agenda. We tried the positive agenda in 2011. It didn't get much traction. Nevertheless, what I've seen in the last two European Council declarations is that the positive agenda is dependent on what happens in the Eastern Mediterranean. Basically, what's happened with Greece and Southern Cyprus. Now, if nothing happens on those issues, does that mean that the positive agenda will not be making any headway? Or do you think that the human rights action plan will that help with regard to making the positive agenda work?
Well, the sentence, as it was stated in the European Council conclusion, was sustained de-escalation regarding the Eastern Mediterranean. And I think, at least for the months from December to now, we have seen that this de-escalation, and I described the different elements in my introductory words, is effectively starting. Now, people will then want to discuss, and this is not my judgment, is 3 months sustained, is 4 months sustained? How do you judge what this is? So it's a matter of also of time. In the question of the wider cooperation, let me say the more the question is addressed to the European Union in terms of reviving accession process, the more the question of the Copenhagen criteria, human rights, rule of law will become a prominent issue. So it's a bit a matter, that's what I try to say in terms of mutual expectation management. What is the level of ambition for this positive agenda? My sense is that if you try to reunite a situation where all expectations are fulfilled on all sides, and you then implement a big bang, it might take a long time to come to that situation. So the question will be, is there a way, perhaps a more incremental way, which allows progress to be realized in a more step-by-step approach on issues where expectations are matching, and where things can be developed one after the other to rebuild also confidence, trust, and so on. But again, this is a decision, this is a very fundamental decision which leaders will have to take on both sides, whether they are, which kind of approach to come into such a positive agenda they want to follow. I can just describe you that I see that there are two different approaches possible.
Thank you. Next question is coming from Ambassador Fatih Ceylan.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador. And thank you for your remarks on the upcoming agenda between Turkey and the European Union. Now, let me immediately put my question. I have carefully examined your resume, and I had noticed that you're heavily involved in CFSP and CSDP processes within the EU. So I have two questions. What, in your opinion, is strategic autonomy, particularly in the eyes of Germany? And can it be achieved without independent nuclear deterrence in terms of security and defense? Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. This is an issue which would in itself merit at least 1 hour of debate, because it is a very important and very complex issue. And this starts with the fact that the word sovereignty and what is attached to it in also different European member states is used differently. When a French interlocutor uses the word sovereignty, he has probably something else in mind than when you have a German or another European using the word sovereignty. So it starts already with the definition of the word. A German lawyer, and German lawyers are not unimportant for political decision-making, would say sovereignty is what describes the state, which is on states, people, authority, and state territory. That's where you exercise sovereignty. I don't think that those who use the word sovereignty in French are actually thinking about making out of the European Union a federal state in which there is sovereignty of that nature. So it starts with a definition of the word. In a more pragmatic German reading and of what we hear in terms of sovereignty, we would translate it by capacity to act rather than by sovereignty. Capacity to act in different fields and capacity to act as a European Union. And then you, in the military and the defense area, you immediately come to the question of NATO and to the transatlantic alliance, to which Turkey is a member, to which the United States are a member, and where most senior politicians in Germany would say, we do not want to put NATO and transatlantic alliance and transatlantic solidarity in question, in danger, because we are perceiving European sovereignty as something which is an antagonism, which is something opposite to NATO. So we need to find a way to combine this. And of course, capacities which member states develop, well, most of these states are at the same time NATO members and EU members. So the way how to make this work together is a key issue for us. So yes, I think most European politicians would agree that the European Union needs to invest more in its capacities to have more capacity also in terms of action. But I don't think that there would be unanimity in saying this is something which should replace NATO or transatlantic alliance and could be put at that place. And of course, the cooperation, particularly in the security area with the United States of America, is of key importance also for the European security. So I don't think the majority of actors in Europe would want strategic autonomy, or whatever word you use, to be perceived as something which is driving Europe too far away from the Atlantic Alliance and the transatlantic bounds. I don't know if that gives you some of the reflections we are working on. And I must say, there is a certain inflation in the word sovereignty right now. We hear sovereignty on all sorts of things. So one needs to, I think, be more precise and speak about what are the instruments we are willing to, the capacities we are willing to build up, so that we have the capacity to act more independently, more autonomously, but within a transatlantic framework, also as European Union.
Thank you. I have 3 questionnaires coming. Ambassador Hadi Kılıçak, Ambassador Emir Şölendiğin, and then Ambassador Ömer Enham. First, Ambassador Hadi Kılıçak, please.
Thank you, Chair. As everybody accepts, the main problem between Turkey and the European Union is the lack of confidence. And for this reason, when I was the Undersecretary for EU Affairs, I used to define the Turkey-EU relations as the history of the non-kept promises of both sides. I said that when the Greek Cypriots became member of the EU, despite the EU rules, just after having voted against the Annan Plan and saw the unification of the island, the EU Commission and the big majority of the member countries had promised us for not allowing the Cyprus question to affect Turkey-EU relations. But we are witnessing now that the EU back always Greek Cypriots and Greece without taking into consideration their theses are right or wrong. And secondly, concerning the human rights and supremacy of law and universal values, the most criticized issue by the EU did not even give the opening benchmarks of the Chapter 23 Judiciary and Fundamental Rights and Chapter 24 Justice, Freedom and Security because of the veto of the Greek Cypriots. And also, EU refused even to open negotiations concerning the modernization or enlargement of the customs union, which will be more beneficial for the EU than Turkey. In these circumstances, do you see any hope, Mr. Ambassador, for the advancement of the relations? And if yes, how? Thank you very much.
Well, I have lived in different positions through the same stories you just described, from the Annan Plan and actually even the negotiation of the initial customs union, which is still in place. I can understand to a large extent the frustration around the Annan Plan, which is present in Turkey and expressed regularly. So I'll not make a mystery about that. On the other hand, I think what I've tried to say in the beginning, if we want to advance, there is a moment where we have to look ahead and not only backwards. And looking ahead means to try to find areas where we can increase cooperation, around which we can rebuild confidence and trust. And the customs union is a potential candidate and has been mentioned as such by the European Council in October and referred to again in December. But there are also other areas in terms of cooperation on migration and refugee issues, or to restart, re-intensify the dialogue on visa and see how far under current circumstances we can go, how much of the benchmarks have been fulfilled. So what I would like to say is, if the way ahead is only possible, if everything becomes possible at the same time, it might be very complicated. If we manage to develop an approach which is more incremental and by which we can take one issue after the other in advance and thus build around these things trust, cooperation and confidence, then perhaps more things become possible. But it's, again, this is a judgment which in the end leaders on both sides have to make. But I would say that a way forward is possible, but it requires political will on both sides. And it requires political will also in terms of managing expectations in public opinions, as well in Turkey as in Europe.
Thank you. Ambassador Emir Şöhrendil.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for your precious time. I'll try to be very brief. Going back to Human Rights Action Plan, if the implementation does not meet your expectations, what might the EU reaction be? That's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, but I will not reply on a question which at this stage is relatively hypothetical. I mean, we would at this stage say we are looking forward to implementation. We have described in our annual reports as a European Commission how we see the situation in terms of rules of law and human rights and so on. And we will most probably in the autumn have to present a new report, and by then we will judge what has actually happened and if this plan has come to fruition in terms of implementation. So it's very difficult to say what would happen if, and I clearly don't want to enter into this discussion.
Thank you. Ambassador Ömer Erhan.
Fair enough.
Thank you. I would also like to thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for being with us today. I totally agree with what you said just a few minutes ago. I think what the EU and Turkey have mutually built in the recent years is non-confidence and no trust. I think what we have to concentrate now is to try to recover these lost mutual feelings. I mean, we need to build confidence and trust. And I think there is ample opportunity to concentrate on issues of mutual concern and mutual benefit. I think refugees, the issue of refugees was one such issue and is still such an issue. It's an issue for fruitful cooperation, but unfortunately, at times it has become a divisive issue. So I would like to ask you your ideas on how we can make further ground on the issue of refugees on cooperation aspect. And the second question is, we have a lot of common interest, I guess, with the EU and EU member states on regional issues like Syria, like Libya and Gulf, Iran, and so on. Do you see an area of an opportunity for cooperation on regional issues? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I start with the refugee issue. I think that this is an area of, actually it's refugee and migration, and it needs to be seen in a bit wider context than only financial assistance. So I think that there is a potential of cooperation, and that actually, you know, the statement from 2016, which is now just about 5 years old, in its part dealing with the refugee issues, has, in my understanding, been implemented by both sides. Well, perhaps it's 90%, but it's there has been a good cooperation. There were other elements in the statement which were related to accession negotiations and so on which implementation, for reasons which I do not want to expand on, were more difficult to implement. But the central part of this statement on the refugee cooperation has been implemented. We have been criticized for being slow with financial assistance. By European standards, we have been quite fast in implementing financial assistance. And I have had the opportunity over the last months to visit quite a number of these projects across the country in Turkey. And I must say many of them are very useful. They are done together with the Turkish Ministry of Health, for example, in the health sector, with the Ministry of Education, areas in which Turkey is making a huge effort, and where actually also, you know, Europeans need to realize how much Turkey is doing to host this huge refugee community, to which what the European Union can contribute is a contribution. It's perhaps a significant contribution, but it is by far not the bulk of the effort. The bulk of the effort is done by this country. And here, now 10 years into the Syria conflict, the situation is also evolving. We have people now here in this country who are here since 8, 9, 10 years, who have had their children born in this country, who have their children which go to school in this country and learn Turkish. So the issues to be addressed evolve over time, but I am convinced that the European Union should continue to support Turkey substantially in this issue, but that it should also extend this in terms of a policy dialogue to other migration issues, because for the time being it's linked to basically Syria, but there are other migration issues, Afghanistan, I mean, you know them as well as I. So I think we need to have a wider cooperation on this. There is, if we talk to the local actors in the different provinces in Turkey, they do recognize that what we try to do tries to help their objectives, because it makes only sense if it feeds into what the country is doing. We can only do it together. So there is a potential, and I think there's a potential for continued, also significant cooperation. On the regional issues, I think we should step up, and we have started to do this in February, step up a political dialogue between the foreign ministries and the European External Action Service and the national foreign ministries on these regional on this regional crisis, because I agree with you that there are a number of issues where we have common interests, where we need to compare better not only what our interests are, but what are the instruments we think are useful to put in place so that the objectives are obtained. But let me also be honest in a way that there are some issues on which within the European Union, I have quite huge differences of opinion, which makes it difficult for me to have a sustained dialogue with a country like Turkey, where the decision-making structure is very clear. So there's a structural difference between the European Union and Turkey, which in some of the regional conflicts make dialogue more complicated, because we have also to make our homework. But this should not prevent us, I think, from having a much more intensive dialogue on these issues to understand better and to see where we are going. I see a perspective for progress right now in Libya, cautiously optimistic that things are advancing in the right direction. Honestly, and unfortunately, I don't see much movement on a political process to solve the Syria crisis at this stage. And this is a drama. I think Turkey and European countries would want very much to have a serious political process which would lead to solutions which would also be acceptable to those who have left Syria, and create an environment in which they could feel comfortable to go back to Syria. But at this stage, the political process on Syria, unfortunately, is, on French, I would say, au point mort. Well, that does not mean that we should not make diplomatic efforts, but I see a difference in terms of perspective between Libya and Syria at this stage, at this moment.
I got unmuted, I'm sorry. In view of the time, maybe we can ask questions two at a time. That's what I was saying. So Erdoğan İşcan, please, Ambassador.
Thank you, Selim. Ambassador, your openness for dialogue is well appreciated. Thank you for sparing time for us. Ambassador, my question may take you a little beyond the limits of Turkey-EU relations. I wish to take you to the Council of Europe, where 47 states in a wider European geography are members, which include also all 27 members of the European Union. And there are two crucial conventions of the Council of Europe. The first one is, of course, the fundamental one, the European Convention on Human Rights. I think that there was a recent statement by the EU Commission stating that accession of the European Union to the European Convention on Human Rights would help to guarantee coherence and consistency between EU law and the convention system. European Convention of Human Rights, no doubt, supports our shared values of human rights, fundamental freedoms, and democracy in Europe. I know it is underway, the work is underway in the EU to move towards acceding to the European Convention, and it is also a legal requirement under the Lisbon Treaty. But no tangible progress has yet been achieved. May I ask where the EU stands at the moment in relation to acceding to the European Convention of Human Rights? And the second question is follows the first one. Also, I know there is work underway in the Commission to become party to the Istanbul Convention. the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence. It is very topical these days in Turkey, in the world. Where does the EU stand as well to become party to the Istanbul Convention? Could you possibly enlighten? Thank you.
Can we have or would you like to answer this directly?
No, I don't know. I have another 10 to 15 minutes. So if you want to ask one or two other questions, I can take them together at the end. Okay. That's perhaps easier.
Okay. Barçın İnanç.
Ambassador, thank you very much. Prior to 2016, I recall there has been EU funds have been used in projects to make acquainted the Turkish judiciary with the European standards. Now, I can imagine that with the coup and in the aftermath of the coup, these kind of schemes might have been put to the back burner, but I'm wondering what kind of projects you are planning to prioritize during your tenure in Ankara. And another question is going to be a wild sort of a question, but you know, the European diplomats usually would say that Turkey has a very great production capacity, it's very fast, it's very good in delivery, etc. So I might imagine pharmaceuticals could be one as well. Now, I know that in Europe itself, there is this unity, there's some kind of a chaos in terms of these vaccinations, etc. But I was wondering whether there could be any dialogue in terms of some of the vaccine being produced in Turkey, perhaps. Again, this, you know, this might come to you as a wild question, but I'm just, you know, trying my chance. Thanks.
And lastly, Ambassador Ali Reza Çolak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. I admire your total frankness. If it is not so hypothetical, my question is very simple. How do you see the future of the European Union after Brexit? Will it be weakened, strengthened, or does the European Union has a strong future? I would like to have your opinion on that matter. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Well, I start with the Council of Europe and the Convention and the European Union's accession to it. I have personally been always in favor. The issue had been discussed already in the European Convention in 2002, 2003, and the article to which you refer was part of the Constitutional Treaty and found its way into the Lisbon Treaty. I have not looked into the last 6 months into the last debates, but the problem which was the stumbling block for quite some time and probably still is the question of the relationship between the two courts, the court in Luxembourg and the court in Strasbourg, and the different, at least initial advices which the court in Luxembourg had given were not favorable. I must say personally, I have a different view. I think that if national member states and their constitutional courts accept the supremacy of the court in Strasbourg on human rights issues, so should the European Court in Luxembourg. But when you are in discussions about supremacies of the highest courts, you always get into a situation which is very difficult for political decision makers, because they, if they have to tell a court what he has to do and what he has not to do, it becomes very, very complicated. So my sense is that, at least, again, I have not looked into the issue for the last 6 months, but when I last have been involved in it, this was the main point, the main problem which had emerged. On the Istanbul Convention, honestly, I can't tell you because I haven't looked into it, and I don't want to say things without having a basis for saying it. We are very, I mean, for us, the Istanbul Convention is very important. Member states are part. Once in a while, the participation or not participation of the European Union as an institution is also a legal and institutional question in the relationship between member states and the Commission and the institution, in view of the different competences between the national and the European level. But honestly, I don't want to speculate. I would need to check precisely before I could give you a precise answer. On the EU funds for judiciary, we are working on projects. We would like to continue these type of cooperations. We have one project we are working right now on, which I hope will see the day soon with the Constitutional Court here in the country. And we have one project where we work together with the ministries and the representatives of Turkish notaries. So we try to continue to work in terms of institution building and support for the independent judiciary in Turkey. So these are the two specific examples I can mention to you on which we are working right now and which I hope will see the day soon. On pharmaceuticals, actually we have a little difference of view in the customs union on the way Turkey is pricing pharmaceutical products, which we find not in line with the customs union rules. So independent of the question of vaccinations and production capacity, there is a pricing scheme right now in Turkey, which we find not in line with customs union obligations, and the objective of which is, let me put it this way, to induce European pharmaceutical companies to locate their production for Turkey in Turkey. So there's a little point which we need to clarify before we can go to a wider way of cooperation. On Brexit, we never have asked for Brexit. I think Brexit is an historical accident to a certain extent. Even those who were advocating Brexit in the referendum in 2016 were sure that they would lose. And actually, when they won, they had for 9 months no plan what they wanted to do with their victory. So it certainly is a pity, and it is not least in external relations weakening, of course, the European Union. On the other hand, Britain and its relationship with the European Union has been ambiguous since the beginning. And this ambiguity has also led to situations where the British position has weakened EU decision-making. So you can also hope for strengthening of the coherence within the European Union after Britain has left. But you know, it's still 27 member states. It's still a very complex entity. So the only point which, from my point of view, seems to be interesting and quite sure is, since Brexit and since people now see to also what effects Brexit has in terms of economy and other issues on Britain, the appetite for exits in other member states has considerably decreased. And for countries who are on the European continent, who are not in Ireland, who don't have the British tradition, it's even more complicated. So I think this will at least has stopped the appetite here and there. We had discussions in French presidential elections, the two last, about people arguing for leaving the euro. We don't hear any of this anymore in the French public debate, and not in Italy either. So the in this sense, perhaps it helps to stabilize those who remain. And in relationship to Turkey, perhaps a quick comment. Today's relationship between the European Union and Turkey, which is organized in the customs union, in the cooperation through many programs to which Turkey assists, is more intense than the relationship between the European Union and Great Britain under the Brexit deal. It's customs union, it's Erasmus, it's many other things. So it's quite interesting to see that how this has shifted. Well, I leave it perhaps at this, but it remains for me a tragedy that this accidental exit took place.
Thank you, Ambassador. I don't see any other questions coming. So if I may use my capacity as a moderator to ask you one final question, and this is with regard to the customs union. You know, it's a knee-jerk reaction to say that as accession is not going anywhere, let's modernize the customs union, but we're not going anywhere. We're circling around. And it's been 6 years since we had a roadmap to, modernize it. Do you think that we can actually maybe restrict it to a few items and maybe add digital economy, the green economy, to change the composition of what the modernization should be? I mean, do you give any kind of recommendations from Ankara as a EU representation to Brussels to find a way in which we can actually move without going to politics?
Well, I would very much like the European Union and Turkey to enter into this negotiation. This anyhow will be a negotiation which will take more than one round. So it's not something, it will be a complicated trade negotiation, but with a lot of potential and important issues which need to be addressed. My personal advice would be not to start to redefine a new mandate, because that would require the Commission to prepare a new mandate, to submit a new mandate, and that would take quite some time. My preference at this stage would be that the Council actually give the Commission the mandate on the basis of the existing mandate to start negotiations. And if then in the course of the negotiations, the mandate needs to be adapted to the situation in the negotiation, to issues which need to be solved, then we can do that. But if we want to open these negotiations, I think we should try to get to a situation where the Council gives the mandate to the Commission to start on the basis of the mandate, even if it's already some years old, rather than to ask the Commission to elaborate a new mandate. The Commission to elaborate a new mandate, it's a year. I don't know where I'm in a year. If I have a window of opportunity in the course of this year to open on the basis of today's mandate, I would very much prefer.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I think that we've come to the end of our session. We thank you very much for being with us. As I said, you're the first guest as our ambassador series in this Ankara Policy Center. We do hope that we'll have a chance to see you in a live session once
I hope
the
so.
pandemic's over. And we wish you well. You've been here for only about 6.5 months now, and we hope that you'll have a long stay and a fruitful stay, and hope that you will actually revitalize the relationship itself. So
it will depend on all of us, but I will try to do my bit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
All the best. Thank you.
Bye-bye.